take this with a grain of salt, okay? You have been warned. Like I said in my last video, I am not done. I'm still practicing. I'm still going through a shift. I have been practicing Buddhist Dharma since 2008, 16 years of practice. I can say that I have meditated almost every day, perhaps every day, because meditation wasn't something I decided to practice. It just started happening to me, and it hasn't really left me. It doesn't really go away. So I think as the years have passed, the meditation experience has only permeated more and more my life and my time and dimensions, spatial and temporal dimensions. And it's been 16 years of this experience. So I think I can say it's been meditation practice almost every day. And I know that this is very, very different from what other people experience when they get into meditation, because many don't go through the same experience that I went through, and they usually start practicing through some sort of discipline, and they have to like develop the motivation to sit every day in the morning and do it even when they don't want to do it. And I didn't have to go through that because it just came natural to me. So I understand it's not the same. However, I do think that if you continue to practice, even if it doesn't happen natural to you, you will eventually reach a point where meditation won't leave you, and it'll be just present every day with, so some karma present, and also the sense of a self, or the sense of duality, or the presence of neurosis and all these things that need to be purified. That all will be present. The meditation experience will begin to include that in practice, and it'll take over. And then all these things, the self, duality, subject and object, and the stories, the narratives, will become something that goes into the background. They won't be so relevant, or they will stop being relevant for you gradually. At least that's how it has been for me. So, going back to the realizations, this is, I think, a very important topic. I don't really fit into a model of stages of spiritual practice. There are several models, and all of them kind of described what I've been going through, and they have also been super different to what I have experienced. I have studied the models proposed by the Pali Canon, the Theravada tradition, also the more recent models, for instance, like that of Daniel Ingram and Kenneth Folk, and they do correspond to some extent to my experience, but not completely. And I've also studied the 5-path models by the Tibetans, and for some reason that one corresponds a bit more to what I have seen in practice, but not completely. And lately I've gone back to the 10-fetter model, 10-fetter path, which is the the Theravada model of the path to awakening and the stages of insight. I'm not going to describe the models in details. One, because I don't know them by heart. I haven't memorized them yet. I'm just going to mention some of the important aspects that I think I have tasted somewhat. So the first insight that I had was what I described in my previous video. Well, what happened in 2008 was just something very big. And like I said, I think it corresponds to the stage called the arising and passing away of phenomena. And I do remember just, realizing that there was a bigger reality, a bigger awareness everywhere, and that perception wasn't really confined to this body at the time. And I was very, very happy when it happened. But I was very, very immature at the time. As is usually the case, what one has become enlightened and, or at least reached a very high level of awakening, and that certainly happened to me. So I apologize to everyone that, talked to me in those days, because I think I was overexcited and, I don't know, very obnoxious, because I wouldn't shut up about it. I was just like so into the insight. It's like I had seen something that could change people's lives, and I was like, everybody should experience this. Everybody should discover this, and see that this is actually true. So I was trying to show this to a lot of people, and I didn't know that everybody has a different process. So that caused a lot of problems. And as the years passed, I realized that I was being very harmful by trying to make people see what I was seeing. And instead of being helpful, I was just being too annoying and like imposing, and I don't know, just not wholesome at all. And some years later, I began studying the Mahayana a lot more, because it is part of what I started to learn with my first teacher. Tibetan Buddhism is part of the Mahayana view, and for those that don't know what that means, well, the Mahayana is like a type of Dharma that is focused on the benefit of all beings. In a way, it's also focused on the emptiness teachings. They also include more descriptions of phenomena that don't really correspond with previous versions of Buddhism. And for example, the Theravada tradition doesn't really acknowledge the authority of some of the sutras in the Mahayana tradition, but they are related in some way. For those that will look for the connections between, or the bridges between Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, you will find the links, but they certainly use different words to describe the teachings of the Buddha. Anyway, I started studying more the Mahayana, more than the sutras in the Pali Canon, and I got into the teachings of the paramitas, the transcendental perfections, which are generosity and discipline or ethical behavior, right action, patience, energy, zeal or enthusiasm, meditation, and wisdom, right? So those are the transcendental perfections that you must develop in the path of the Mahayana. The one who is cultivating those paramitas, those transcendental perfections, is called a bodhisattva. One practices to become enlightened as soon as possible for the benefit of all beings. So that's basically a brief summary of what the Mahayana entails. As opposed to the Theravada tradition, which is more focused on individual liberation, the end of one's suffering and becoming an arhat or a worthy one, which is somewhat similar to the attainment of a Buddha, or the highest attainment according to the discourses of the Buddha that the Theravada tradition recognizes as authentic. Okay, having said that, I was very into the Mahayana. At the time, I started practicing Buddhist Tantra a lot more, and the Tantra certainly gave me much insight into the nature of reality, because the Tantras are it's like they give you like a way to see reality completely different to what you're used to seeing. A Tantra is like a very sophisticated meditation practice that uses ritual, prayer, visualization, magic. So through those skillful means, you are able to transform your perception, purify your awareness, and realize that you are actually pure from the very beginning. Since I was doing a lot of that, I was beginning to see that this purity, this Buddhic nature was, indeed present everywhere, within me, outside of me, in other people, in other beings, in every aspect of phenomena. But it was just like having some glimpses of it, not really something that would stay. That was like a permanent shift. And in those days, I was also in contact with a lot of people on the internet, like serious practitioners or people that would really study the suttas and the tantras and the Mahayana sutras, and they would be very knowledgeable about these subjects. And one of those subjects is a very big subject within Mahayana literature is Buddhist philosophy. For those of you that know, well, in the Mahayana, one of the authors that people study quite a bit is Nagarjuna. And he wrote several treatises that are super important for the Mahayana, because they describe the nature of reality, which is emptiness itself. So I'm not going to get into the details of that, because it's a very hard subject, and I haven't really mastered not just the understanding, but the full realization of the implications of Nagarjuna's writings, and that would limit my verbal exposition of the subject. But I will say this. I have been reading Nagarjuna for quite some time, and it has been a challenge for me, because my mind is not so open to philosophical inquiry. I think I'm more open to abstract thinking in terms of symbols. So the tantras are something that makes sense for me quite a bit. However, philosophy, I'm not close to it completely. I do like it a lot. It's just not something that comes easy. So I talk to a lot of people that are more knowledgeable than me in terms of philosophy, and there's a particular person that I have spoken about Buddhist philosophy for quite some time, and I'm sure that some of you that are present in our cyber communities will know this person. His name is Stian. He's from Norway, and he has been teaching me a lot on proper understanding of Buddhist philosophy and Nagarjuna's text, the verses from the Middle Way and the 70 stanzas into emptiness, those classical texts. And we have been discussing that quite a bit. But there was a previous discussion that I had with my friend, with Stian, on the Pali Canon Suttas, because he's also very knowledgeable of the Buddha's discourses from the Pali Canon. He gave to me, he gave me transmission of an insight he had when he was analyzing the suttas. I'm sure he has, a better account of this, but from what he has told me, first he studied the emptiness teachings quite a bit, which is a very Mahayanic subject, and then he went back to the suttas and began studying the suttas quite a bit, and suddenly something very big clicked for him, related to one of the core teachings of the Buddha, which is dependent arising. And he was able to realize an aspect of that, specifically the aspect of conditionality. So conditionality refers to how something, when it rises, conditions another thing. Said differently, if something rises, another thing rises. If there's a cloudy sky, rain will rise. If there is some wood, some logs and spark, maybe a fire rises. If this rises, that rises. That's basically what conditionality says. And that's part of the teachings of the Pali Canon Suttas. And Stian had been studying the words of the Buddha for quite some time, and he was able to realize the nature of conditionality, which is an aspect of dependent arising. And that had a huge impact on his experience and perception. Maybe one day I'll invite him so he can tell us more about it. So he began talking about this on the Facebook groups that we belong to, and I mean, some of those groups are long gone, but at the time we were talking about that. Well, he was talking about that, and when I read, those things that he was saying and discussing with other members of the community, they made sense. And I was able to discern what he was talking about, but not just discern it conceptually, but also in my experience. So then I began talking to him through just the messenger apps, and we would have long conversations. All of this is recorded. Maybe I'll share a link in the description if you want to read our conversations. But these conversations, in brief, were about dependent arising and conditionality, which is a core teaching within Theravada Buddhism. I think it's the main teaching of the Buddha, the most important teaching, actually. When I discussed this with my friend, and he explained to me all the implications of the insight, and I was able to discern this in my experience, that had a very big impact in my perception again. And things shifted again. My Tantra practice skyrocketed. I was able to practice Tantra with more skill, and I was able to generate the qualities and the views, the required views necessary for correct tantric practice, and generate the multidimensional visualizations that one has to sustain when practicing Buddhist Tantra in a very, very clear and effortless way. And this was due the transmission that my friend Stian gave me, transmission of dependent arising and the nature of conditionality. I won't go into the detail of the teaching and the implications in terms of cognition and the senses and consciousness itself, but what I will say is that such realization, such experience made me see that the self is something that cannot be established, even though we think we can establish it. I can now see that it's something impossible. That gave me an immense relief again. So in 2008, I felt relief from the first glimpse of how reality is, how when I surrendered into emptiness and surrendered to the nature of how things are. And then later, years later, when I was having deep conversations with my friend, and when he gave me the transmission of his insight, I was able to completely let go of having to sustain a character. And although sometimes the sense of self and the sense of a character, it is present, it is still very present sometimes, it just seems very hollow. And slowly it's losing ground as time passes by. And this is all recorded not just in the conversations with my friend, but it is like it's right there in the suttas, in the words of the Buddha, when he describes the consciousness, the different types of consciousness and different types of perception, and when he describes in detail the conditions and the causes of each element of one's experience, one can see that the self cannot be established. That is the main idea here, the main point. And just to quote my friend Stian, and to quote the Buddha himself, because the words came from the Buddha, if the I rises, and if the forms that the I sees rise, and if there's contact between the I and the forms, then visual consciousness rises. But if one of those conditions doesn't arise, then visual consciousness doesn't arise. Since those conditions are not in my control, I can definitely see that visual consciousness is not self, because it isn't in my control. For instance, that's just one example of how the transmission goes. And that was, very big. That was huge. And then later on, I think 1 year or 2 years later, we began discussing Nagarjuna, philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, and not so much the Pali Canon. We were more into a Mahayanic state of mind, so to speak. So he was helping me understand the texts, the philosophical text written by Nagarjuna, and I was able to discern what he was talking about. Things clicked. And since I already had some realizations of the nature of reality from previous practice and previous teachings, when I also began understanding conceptually the views from the emptiness teachings that were being described in the philosophical texts written by Nagarjuna, I had another shift, as expected. I was able to realize an aspect of emptiness, I would say. I know it's still a partial realization, because I can sense, some parts of me that need to be purified from some wrong views and some subtle clinging. But the shifts in awareness have also been huge and have affected my practice, my views, and my life in irreversible ways. Specifically, having understood conceptually and non-conceptually the nature of phenomena, which is emptiness, there is a huge, clear openness that is absolutely aware of everything that is happening. I can see that awareness becomes something super transparent and crystal clear, that cognizes everything. But that everything that is being cognized by open awareness is cognition itself. In other words, what awareness cognizes is more awareness. It's more emptiness, more openness, more spaciousness. It's like a never-ending clarity. And that open clarity that has no beginning and no end is the true nature of phenomena, which prevents not just the establishment of the self, but also the establishing of things. This non-establishment of self and things doesn't mean that appearances are not here. Of course, appearances are here. It's just that I don't establish a self, and I don't establish that things are out there or in here. Out there and in here are not established. So what are the implications of that? Well, if there is no ground, or if there is no establishing of self, then neurosis cannot be established. So that's like the most important implications of this realization that advances as time passes, it progresses. And by that I mean it takes over my experience little by little. So that's that. And I think that's it. I will have more to say later. So now you have some background on me and where I stand, so to speak. And I'm going to be discussing all sorts of things. I have them written down. So I'll just, get my journal out and start doing videos on each of the things that I think I need to talk about and discuss and share with you. So thank you for listening, and I hope you continue following what I have to share. And if you have any questions, just send me a message, drop a comment. And you can also reach me at alejandro@activedharma.com. Visit my website and, to find out what else I do. I do teach sometimes. Not so much these days, but yes, we can do that if you want. All right, well, take it easy. Bye.